Explain to the people who write to me, and there are some who say, "What's he done? Nothing."
Yep.
Explain how you've done something.
All right. Well, for a start off, if you just think about it economically, when we came in, we inherited a recession. We inherited a decade of deficits. We inherited programs that weren't working, and New Zealand was not doing well competitively. Effectively, that was witnessed by the fact that 35,000 Kiwis a year were picking up and going off to Australia. And so as we sit here today, debt will now be in nominal terms, $100 billion less than otherwise would have been by 2020. We've got the second strongest fiscal position in the world of OECD countries, other than Norway. Our unemployment rate's 5.4% and falling. Australia's 6.3% and rising, and they've had stronger terms of trade, so stronger export prices than we have had. Christchurch is, I think, back on its feet again and starting to operate. The crime rate is falling. The education output across all measures is improving in terms of number of kids in ECE, number of kids leaving with NCEA, particularly results from Maori and Pacific students. Crime rate's on a 35-year low. And if you look at welfare, substantial reform, which is reducing both the liability for the taxpayer, but also delivering better results for people. So I'm not saying it's perfect, but I reckon we get better raps in the international media than we arguably even get in the New Zealand media because they look at us on a relative basis and say we're doing pretty well.
Yes, but a prophet in his own country and all of that. I'm going to get a bit picky.
Spirit of Christmas.
I'm going to get a bit picky on a couple of things.
Yeah, okay.
Crime rate down. I don't believe it. Most people don't believe it.
Yeah.
The statistics might be down, but the crime rate, most people believe, isn't down. Much of it doesn't get reported.
Okay, so what happens is reporting of crime has increased over time, particularly domestic violence. So what's happened is over the course of successive campaigns in probably the last decade or so, there has been a much greater campaign to, and thankfully, willingness of people to report domestic violence. So a quarter of all people, I think, who are in prison are there because they've killed or undertaken a substantial crime against, theoretically, a loved one, family member. So you might say, well, crime rate's not falling, and I'm not saying to you, leave your keys in your car and the door unlocked and everything will be fine at night. But what I can tell you, just even through the prison population, we can see how that's falling, and in a lot of areas it's falling. If you wanted to be cynical, what you'd say is actually the population is aging, and it's typically a younger audience that commits crime. Not always, obviously, but people commit crime when they're younger. Typically, as people get older, they start getting a job and they stop doing that. So that's the criticism that you might get from people who look at these things. But actually, I'd say to you, we've made quite a lot of changes. It just fundamentally is coming down. It's like saying, do you think it's dangerous driving on the road? Will people get killed over Christmas in New Zealand? Tragically, they will. But the rate of people dying on the roads is a third of what it was 20 years ago. It just is.
Speaking of crime and people not being behind bars but out on bail when they shouldn't be, witnessing the scenes in Sydney on Monday. Any thoughts? Because we suffer from that quite a bit.
Yeah. Okay. So just talking to Tony Abbott and Stephen Harper and various others who have had these domestic terrorist attacks, and you can label them with whatever you like, all of them are people that have been known to the authorities. So they're not coming out of the blue. They're not a random person we've never heard of. And when I gave that national security speech and talked about the 30 or 40 people that were identified and on that list, some of them bear similar characteristics to the person that undertook the terrorist attack in Australia this week. So the point really being that this is the challenge, and the challenge is not always identifying that somebody is threatening to do something bad. Or has previously done something bad. It's reaching a threshold where you can actually do something about it. So, if you look at a number of high-profile cases that have been around New Zealand, there's been taped evidence of people saying they're going to do bad things, and in fact, actually, when they get to court, they just say, "Oh, well, I was only joking. I didn't really mean I was letting off steam." So that's the trade-off, and and it's a bit like the Greens, isn't it? I mean, Russell Norman, he gets up every day on television, blesses cotton little socks, and says we don't need intelligence agencies. We shouldn't be taking freedom and liberty of people. We shouldn't be able to cancel someone's passport that wants to go and be a suicide bomber somewhere. And yet, where is the Muppet this week when something's going wrong? he can just run for the hills because it's not his responsibility to keep New Zealanders safe. It's mine.
Are you talking about across the Tasman?
Yeah,
that event.
Yeah. Or any similar type of event. You see, he doesn't have to worry about the counterfactual. I do. I have to worry about keeping people safe, and I'm going to do that job whether he and others criticise me or not, because that's my responsibility.
But there is a follow-on to that, and we'll pick it up again briefly after the break.